Hi, this is Marcia Vaca with Vaca Associates Family Checks and Balances. I want to spend a few minutes today talking to you about how to avoid family conflicts when you're in the midst of caregiving for an aging loved one. Obviously, this can be an area in which there can be a lot of disagreement and debate, but it also can be one of the most meaningful, positive, and uplifting experiences you'll ever have as a family. So I want to be able to share with you some of the tips and hints that I've learned over many decades of working with families, being a negotiator and mediator for families, as well as doing hands-on care and being that outside support person. So it can be very frustrating. It can be upsetting as you try to work through everything that a loved one might need. There can be a lot of misunderstandings and disagreements as to what needs to happen when, who ought to do it, how it ought to be done, and all those kinds of things. Well, you're not alone. Like I say, you're not the first family to go through this. Caregiving is absolutely one of the most meaningful things that we can actually do for one another. We think nothing of doing it when we have a young baby come into the household. It does become a different picture, though, when we have an older adult who suddenly needs our hands-on care and support. And it's full of emotions, good ones and not so great ones. And so I want to share with you some of those things I've learned over my lifetime in terms of how to get through family caregiving and to come out on the other side of it feeling incredibly supported, loved, and knowing that your family member has been taken care of. First off, communicate. Communicate early on, communicate as openly, as honestly, and as clearly as you possibly can. If you're an older family member listening to this, a mom, a dad, a grandpa, or grandma, then I would highly recommend that if you've not called your children or grandchildren, nieces and nephews together and sat down and begun to have this dialogue with them about what your wishes are, what your expectations are, I highly recommend that you do that. I think you'd be surprised. The adult children in your life might be relieved, totally relieved, that you took it upon yourself to initiate the conversation. Now, if you're the adult child or grandchild or niece or nephew, then it behooves you to take on that responsibility of opening up the conversation with your loved one. Yes, it can be extremely difficult opening up the dialogue with them on these kind of issues, but I think if you approach it from the standpoint of, hey, someday you might need some help and some support, and I want to be there for you, but I really don't know what your expectations would be or what you might like me to do for you or to help you with, and can we sit and have a conversation about that? If you are very open yourself, letting them know you don't have all the answers, but you want to work together with them, I think you'll find that they might very well appreciate the fact that someone finally broke the ice and you're going to sit down and have that conversation. I think it's important that as you do communicate amongst your siblings, parents, other family members, that you maybe start out before the crises, obviously, hopefully, before the crisis hits, and already build into your schedule some regular family check-in times, whether that's once a week, once a month, get on Zoom calls, or just a shared email thread or text message thread, and just begin to talk and touch base with each other and deal maybe with one question at a time. Mom, if dad got sick, what would be the most helpful thing for me to do for you as you continue to care for dad? Something as simple as that, and that's a big issue, I know, but something as simple as that may begin to open that door for conversation. Remember that the goal isn't to convince each other who's right, who's wrong, or which way's better, or which way shouldn't happen at all. It's really just to listen and to understand, particularly in the early stages. You need to be as calm and collected yourself, not letting your emotions already sort of run away and all your responses are emotional responses. You need to learn how to say, hey, look, I'm concerned. I'm concerned because I know I might need help in the future, and I want to make sure that I do what you want me to do versus doing things that I think you might want me to do. So the I statements are very important, particularly as you get into the midst of caregiving. And if you're the hands-on caregiver or the primary caregiver and you're feeling overwhelmed, one of the worst statements you can make to your siblings and others is, you never pick up your phone when I call you. You are never available when I need you. It always goes to voicemail. And then you take hours to call me back, and I needed you 4 hours ago, or I needed you yesterday. Whenever you come across that way, that immediately puts that person's defenses up. Versus when you say, I'm overwhelmed, I'm exhausted, I need help with Dad's medications. The doctor changed them up. I'm confused. Do you have an hour that you could give me so we could go over the medications together? I want to make sure I'm doing it right. Do you see how the tone of those kind of statements are really very different? So if you can learn to use I statements versus the you, like pointing your finger at the other person, I think you'll get much further down the line in being able to communicate clearly with each other and really put some plans in place that support both you as a caregiver as well as your loved one receiving the care. Obviously, if you can communicate clearly with one another early on before the crisis hits, then you can define roles and responsibilities a lot easier without all the emotions behind all of that. If you don't define everybody's role and responsibility, you can get into a lot of confusion, and confusion will usually lead to resentment, particularly if someone is like, I'll be the hands-on caregiver, but I'm going to need a break every 3 days, 4 days, whatever. If that's only inside your head and you haven't talked it out with your siblings and other family members, then suddenly come day 5, 6, or 7, when you've been caregiving and you're exhausted, you're drained and overwhelmed, then you're going to feel very resentful. And finally, you're going to explode all over the place, which is never a good thing. So I always tell everybody, don't let yourself get all tied up in all those emotions and those feelings of resentment because you're the only one providing the care. You're the only one trying to do everything for mom or dad. You're the only one. You're the only one. I've heard that so many times. But if you begin to communicate, you begin to lay out who's going to do what. Maybe you've got a sibling who loves to go food shopping, and that individual can go do food shopping for mom and dad and bring those groceries in, put them away, let everybody know what's in the house, and they're more than happy to do that. Maybe you've got another sibling who has no issue with providing hands-on care, like giving dad his every few days shower or bath, whatever, and they're happy doing that. Great. You need to play towards everyone's strengths. You need to play towards those things that people are willing and happy to do, such that they don't end up feeling like what they're being asked to do is a burden and they're being put upon. So I always say, talk it through, see who's willing to do what, who's got the skills to do certain things, but don't always assume that that's what they're going to be willing to do. So figure out who's going to do what and what are they most satisfied and happy to do without feeling burdened by doing that. And then you can always bring in other family friends or professional people to do those things that are still needed, but that no one within the family really wants to do. That's important to remember, that you can supplement, complement what family caregivers are doing with professional caregivers, and vice versa. But first you have to figure out who wants to do what, who's able to do what. Get it down on paper. Define those expectations so there's no resentment. Get onto a shared calendar with each other so you can share information back and forth. Get onto a common email thread with each other such that you can share information about what happened at a doctor's appointment so everybody stays on the same page together. If there's been medication changes or if there's been any other adjustments that everybody on the caregiving team needs to know, whether you're a family caregiver or whether you're a professional caregiver. And remember that over time, as your loved one continues to age, those changes or I should say the changes in what they need to have done, it's going to change over time. So be prepared for that. What may work this month may not work next month. So you have to be flexible. You have to be willing to adjust as needed based on what your loved one needs at the time. The other thing is to remember who it is you're caring for, and that if they're able to speak their wishes and desires, you need to check in with them. You need to ask them what their wishes and desires are. You know, we get so caught up as caregivers in the tasks that need to be done. We've got so many things to do, so few hours to do them. We just sort of begin to say, okay, this needs to be done, that needs to be done, etc., etc., etc. And then all of a sudden, here we are as siblings, and I'm the middle of three daughters, three girls. I have an older sister and a younger sister. And there can be a whole lot of confusion, disagreements that come up, and all of a sudden you realize, if you stop and think about it, well, did we ask Mom what she wants? Did we ask Dad what he thinks would be best? Sometimes we forget to do that to the very people that we're trying to support and provide assistance to. We're all busy. We get caught up in just trying to get the task done and completed. And yet it's so important to remember that the focus is not on us. The focus isn't on us. It's on that person that we're trying to support and assist. And we need to talk to them. If they're able to express those desires, we need to find out what those desires are. Hopefully they've already set out some of their estate planning documents with their attorney. They've already put in place their advance directive for healthcare or their power of attorney for healthcare. They've already identified what some of their wishes and desires are. That's great. That's wonderful. And if also they've done a power of attorney for finances so that you know what some of those wishes and desires are. Find out if those documents are in place. Use those documents as a guidepost for you. Let those help you determine how best to support your loved one. Also remember, it's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's all about what's right for your loved one that all of you as a team are trying to support. The other thing that I've found over time that becomes really important to try to understand about each other, you know, we all have different coping mechanisms for how we deal with stress, how we deal with the changes that we see our loved ones going through, how we begin to process some of our own internal thoughts about what we see happening. It's almost like I tell family members, it's almost like you realize all of a sudden one day you realize Mom and Dad are growing older and they can't be independent any longer and they're not doing as well as they used to be. Well, whether you realize it or not, there's a little piece of grief that begins to set in for that because you're losing the mom and dad that you've always known, who's always been there for you. And it's real hard sometimes to figure out where we're at with those kind of issues and how we're going to cope for ourselves through all of that. But, you know, for myself as a middle child, my coping mechanism might be very different than my older sister or very different than my younger sister. Your coping mechanisms may be very different than your mom or your dad or your grandpa or your grandma, because even the one who needs the care, they're trying to cope with their changes and potential loss of independence. So you've got all these different coping styles going on, and it's very hard sometimes to settle into how not to judge or how not to compare ourselves with somebody else, or how to not basically tell someone how they ought to be coping. It's not your place to tell somebody else how they ought to cope. You're probably struggling enough with your own feelings and your own coping. So recognize the fact that that sibling who may really back off and not appear to be very involved, or all they want to do is push the paperwork, they really don't want to, be the one doing hands-on care. It's not that they don't love that family member, but it may be their way of trying to cope with what they see happening and going on. So just be aware of that. Be as gentle and kind with each other as you can, and be as gentle and kind with yourself as you can be. Which leads me into almost one of my final points, and that's all the emotions that we end up going through. Caregiving is very emotional. It's emotional for you as the caregiver. It's emotional for your loved one that you're trying to support. My mom, she was pretty furious at times. Angry. Let me call it that. She was just flat out angry. I'll never forget about the time she was 93 years of age, almost, decided she needed to stop driving. And I'll never forget her phone call. We were so lucky as a family that my mom made her own decision to stop driving, but she was not happy about it. I remember her phone call when she called and she said, "Marcia, I've made the decision. I'm not going to drive anymore. I'm not going to get my license renewed. That's that. I don't want to talk about it. Bye." And she hung up. She was so frustrated. She was so upset. She was so angered, actually, by the fact that she wasn't able to see clearly enough anymore and to have the ability to respond quickly enough on the road. She made that decision for herself, but she was so mad about not being able to drive anymore. So there's so many, emotions. I also remember her saying things to me at times that just, boy, it really hurt. It was like I was being hollered at, that I wasn't being a good enough daughter, or I wasn't being a good enough caregiver, or I wasn't there enough to support her and support my dad. And I did live about 7 hours away from mom and dad. My older sister was closer, a little closer to them. My younger sister was on the other side of the country. And so somehow, some way, all three of us girls, we figured out a way to support our mom and dad. And I'm not saying there were not some bumps along the way. There were. But because we were able to keep the lines of communication open, and we were trying to be respectful of each other as well as being respectful of our parents, we managed to get through it. And I loved my sisters and I loved my mom and dad, even with all the ups and downs that we went through. Sometimes conversations get so heated, or if you recognize the fact that you're getting very emotional about the conversation, sometimes you just have to say, "Hey, look, I need to step back from this right now. Give me an hour. Let's come back in an hour and let's talk." Or maybe you even need to wait a week, 2 weeks to have the conversation. But the thing that I will highly recommend to you, don't put off the conversation just because you're emotional, just because it's a difficult conversation. The conversation needs to be had most often. It does need to be had. You need to try to remain as calm as you can. You need to be respectful of your loved one and your siblings and your other support team. And oftentimes I find that the more exhausted we are, the more emotional we become, the more overwhelmed we are, the more emotional we are. So you may find yourself in that spot where, in order to have a very calm, focused conversation about an issue, you need to first take care of yourself. And I highly recommend that as caregivers, somehow, some way, figure out how to take care of yourself in the midst of that. Don't become so isolated from your own life, your friends, the things that you love to do, that you become resentful and you get overwhelmed because you have no break, you have no respite. Now, I know that that is easier said than done, but that's where, again, if you begin the communications early on, you can build your support team for you as much as you're working to build the support team for your loved one who needs the care. And I love the concept and idea that a rested caregiver is a much better caregiver and a much better communicator. When it does get to the point that the disagreements just keep happening, you can't seem to get things resolved amongst yourselves, then, that's okay. You have not failed. Do not view that as failure. Just simply acknowledge that that's where you're at as a family and bring in a neutral third party, someone who has no emotional connections, no axes to grind, as we say, somebody who can listen to everybody's point of view and perspective and maybe provide some new insights, some new ideas that none of you have thought of yet. So they can help actually to guide some of those very difficult conversations. That's part of what I do with my clients and my patients and their families. So don't hesitate to bring in that third party. Even if you have to pay a little bit to have someone come in, I will tell you it is well worth the money and well worth the time. The last thing I'll remind you is that as caregivers, we get very scoped in. We sort of drill down into the day-to-day tasks that have to be done, or what has to be done this week, or what has to be done next week. And in the midst of everything that has to be accomplished, we sort of lose sight of the big picture. And the big picture is to remember that you and your team, you're all on the same page with each other. Hopefully you can stay on the same page with each other because you've learned how to communicate. You communicate often. You share information and data with one another. You've all got the same goal, and that is to make sure that your loved one gets the very, very best care possible, right? Isn't that really the goal of family caregiving and being involved with our loved ones? You need to start seeing that, yes, there will be disagreements, but those don't have to turn into battles. It's not a win or lose proposition, but it's an opportunity to think about things in a new way, maybe learn a new way to do something that you hadn't thought of, maybe learn something new about your sibling that you never realized, and actually will help to build your relationship and bond to be stronger. I think the other thing is to remember that this part of the journey isn't going to last forever. I mean, hopefully, maybe you're stepping in for a short period of time with an older loved one and they're going to get healthy and well and become independent again. Or in eventually, most cases, our loved one they're going to continue to decline and they'll eventually pass away. But it won't all last forever. You're not the first family to go through this. You will make it. It's just all part of the journey. Yes, it can be tough and very hard, but it also can be very positive and meaningful in some of the best time that you'll ever have with your loved one and your family members. So I like to say, choose compassion, choose understanding, choose patience, choose calm, and choose peace. and be about understanding that while you may not agree on everything, you can agree that you want to provide the very best care possible for your loved one. You know, as caregivers, we want to be empathetic. We want to be honest. We want to be filled with grace and forgiveness as we go through this part of the journey, which I hope will be true for you. And if you need to have any help, any assistance, any other ideas or thoughts, I've given you all my contact information here. Feel free to reach out to me, send me a DM, whether through YouTube, my YouTube channel, or through my website or through Facebook. Just reach out. That's the most important part. Feel free to reach out because that's what we're here to do. We're here to support each other as family caregivers and to have this time be a blessed time, a wonderful time, and a meaningful time, even with all the bumps and the ups and downs that we'll be going through. So thank you for taking time to watch this today. Go back, watch it again, take your own notes, make your own plans, and do reach out if I can assist you in any way. Take care.